What is the floor for Maryland football?
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Trey Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your day. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, new potential hires can feel like high-stakes wagers for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/softoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Maryland football has a pretty low floor. I'm going to go ahead and get that out the way. I think that Maryland football's floor is not high. Usually you want high ceiling, high floor type of players, type of programs, whatever you're talking about. You usually want something that has a high ceiling and a high floor, meaning that if they're bad in what they are on their worst days, or what their worst season is like, or what they are in terms of their career as a player, or whatever you're talking about, is still going to be pretty good. And then you also want them to have a lot of potential and what they can become to be really high as well. And usually you don't get it both worlds. You usually don't get a player with a really high ceiling or a really high floor as well, or a program with a really high ceiling as a really high floor as well. I think it's more common to say a team has a really high ceiling and a really high floor, but most of the time we're talking about players usually either have low ceiling, low floor. Like, they usually don't have it both ways. And I'm here to say that I said that Maryland football has a pretty high ceiling, not anything crazy, but I think a decently high ceiling. But I think our floor is pretty low for what our team can become. I do not think that we have one of the higher floors in the Big Ten. I honestly think that you could argue that we have one of probably the worst floors in the Big Ten in terms of what we are as a team, how we finish next year in the Big Ten. And that's just my opinion on it, because I don't see a lot of things, like for sure things that I'm like, all right, that's a constant, he's going to be really good. That's a constant, he's going to be really good. That's a constant, that player's going to be really good. I don't see a whole lot of that. I would argue at the top of our conference, the top teams in our conference have pretty high floors. Like, I would argue that Penn State has a pretty high floor. I would argue that Oregon has a pretty high floor. I would argue that Ohio State has a pretty high floor. One team that may not have as high of a floor as we think this year is Michigan. Michigan might have a pretty high ceiling just because it's Michigan. Of course, they're going to have some guys, but their floor might not be high as normal just because of the uncertainty at quarterback. But we're not here to talk about those teams. We're here to talk about Maryland. Why do I think the Terps have such a low floor? I mean, I think it starts with the quarterback position, and I've said it. I think MJ Morse is an underrated talent, and I'm thinking he can be a really good player for Maryland football. But we're talking about floor as a player, and I think his floor for Maryland football isn't great. I think it's pretty low, because I think of him and I think of a couple things that make me think he could have a pretty low floor. Number one is that he's just new. He's new to the offense. He's new to the systems that we're running. He's new to the campus in general. He's new to the Maryland program. And you can struggle at the beginning because you're not used to the different types of things that Maryland does on offense. Maybe it's a different read. It's a different feel in the offense. It's a different dropbacks in a certain thing. You're looking at a different player and a different coverage. It just depends. It can be different. And I think that's one reason why at the quarterback position we could have a low floor. And when you have a low floor at the quarterback spot, then it's really, you probably have a lower floor as a team if your quarterback spot has a low floor. So I'm thinking about him in terms of that. I'm also just thinking that he does have a lot of game experience, more than Billy Edwards and Cameron Edge, but still he doesn't have a ton of experience, and he doesn't have any experience in the Big Ten. He's been in the ACC, but I also think that he has the potential to just not be as good as maybe his tools might lead us to think he is. Maybe his accuracy isn't the best. Maybe he can't throw into the particular windows that we might think that he'd been able to. Maybe he can't push the ball on the field like Talia did. And I think he's a stronger arm. And I do think he's a higher floor than Talia did, but I mean a higher ceiling than Talia did, but I don't think his floor is where Talia's was as a player. And I think a lot could go wrong at the quarterback spot. But that's not what I think will happen. I just think there's a potential. I don't think it's crazy to say that that can happen. And then I also just think about our rest of our offense, the offensive line. I think it's a pretty low floor for the offensive line. Yes, it's 5 completely new starters starting right there. That makes you think that's a low floor. That might not go right. There might not be continuity in that offensive line, and things might not go the way that we want it to go up front. And when your offensive line struggles, it makes it harder to pass the ball. It makes it really hard to get the run game going. And the rest of your team is more than likely going to struggle if your offensive line is struggling on the offensive side of the ball. That's just the way it is. So I think the floor in the offensive line isn't particularly high at all for Maryland football. I think it's a pretty low floor for that group. And then I think the running back room and the wide receiver room, I think the floor is in a pretty good spot. The tight end room as well I think the tight end room really exemplifies my statement that a really high ceiling, but the floor can be low. And I know we've heard a lot of good things about Dylan Wade, and we know Preston Howard can be a really good player. But when I think about them, they're young. They're super young. Dylan Wade's still a freshman, and Preston Howard is still young as well. And those are our 2 starters. And when you think of young players in college football, you're going to think of guys that might have a lot of talent and have high ceilings, but they have low floors. I think defensively, overall, we're in a pretty good spot. And I think that the secondary for sure has a low floor. The secondary scares me, to be honest, and that might be the lowest floor out of any position group. But I do still like the rest of the position groups, and I think our safety spot has a really high floor. But I think that our defensive line has a pretty solid floor. But I think the secondary, the cornerback room, the quarterback room, not the secondary in the hall, because I really do like our safety room overall. But that's kind of what I think. But overall, I do feel as if our ceiling is on the lower side. And then when I think about not just our team dynamic, but I look at our schedule, the schedule's interesting. And I do see us dropping games where maybe we end up in a spot where we look at it at the end of the year and we're like, we're one of the worst teams in the Big Ten. I don't think it's crazy to say, and I hate being on the negative side of things, but I don't think it's ridiculous to say. I've already said that we can take a step back this year, but I think that us at our lowest point is probably bottom of the Big Ten, and I don't think it's crazy. I can see a year where we have quarterback problems, in our quarterback room, and things aren't going right there, and offensive line issues, troubles in the secondary, covering some of the better receivers, and then nothing really comes together, and it's not a great year, and a year where we're scratching barely, like we're not even a 500 type of team. I can see it. I can see us losing a game to Michigan State. I can see us even losing a game to Virginia. I can see us losing. I think everybody in the Big Ten conference that we play is losable. I can see us losing an improved Rutgers team, Iowa. I can see us definitely dropping all 3 of USC, Oregon, and Penn State. And it's like, there's not a whole lot of gimme wins, except for you look at it and you would say, okay, Villanova is a gimme win, and then also UConn. But other than that, there's not a whole lot of games that it's like those are just going to be automatic wins for the Terps. So that makes me contribute to thinking that our floor is pretty low. And I do think that we're better than a lot of these teams. I do think that we're going to be better than a lot of these teams. But I just think that our floor as a program is pretty low. And it's going to be up to Coach Loxley to see if he can coach a team that maybe isn't as good as it's been in the past. Maybe it's not as high level as it's been in the past, but it's still a really good team with plenty of players to work with, and see if he can get a quarterback in the right spot, because great coaches make teams that have lower ceilings but do have have lower floors. It's confusing keeping the lower ceiling floor thing. Teams that have lower floors but higher ceilings, they make those teams operate in the higher ceiling, and they make them operate in the higher parts in the room. They don't make sure that they don't hit the floor. And it's going to be up to Coach Loxley to make sure that our floor is already pretty low. don't let the team get down there. Don't let the team go down to a team where it's like we're looking at it and it's regression from where we were last year. We don't want to think that Talia was the success that made our program. We don't want to think like that. I love Talia, but that doesn't put us in a good spot if Talia was the reason that we were good. So when I come out of this, I want to look at this and I want to say after this year that Coach Loxley did a really good job making sure that we didn't hit our floor as a program. And I'm not saying we necessarily need to hit the ceiling and get to 9 or 10 wins and do some special things, but he needs to make sure that his first year without Talia in a while, that he is still going to be able to be successful. And we're going to continue to recruit at a pretty high level, and we're going to continue to be on an upper trajectory as a program. I think this year is really important in terms of that. And I think it's important to make sure that we don't hit the floor and we don't fall all the way to the bottom, where next year we're looking at, or 2 years from now, we're looking at it and we're saying the only way is up after that bad year. That's kind of what I'm saying about Maryland basketball. Maryland basketball hit their floor last year, really hit the floor, and it was probably lower than I expected it. I probably thought that Maryland basketball's floor last year with some of the experience that they brought back, Julian Reese, Dante Scott, all that stuff that we brought back, Jameer Young, and being a preseason top 3 team in the Big Ten, I probably thought our floor was higher than it was. But you realize that bad coaching, bad shooting, and in terms of football, you can put in bad quarterback play, bad defensive play, can't stop the run, bad offensive line play. That can lead you to hit somewhere lower than you may expect. And I'm just saying that Maryland football does have some of those spots where you're looking at it and the quarterback's not playing well, and your floor certainly looks a lot lower and a lot worse than you may think. And so I just think Maryland basketball was a good example of that. But overall, I do think that our floor is pretty low, and I think our floor is being one of the worst teams in the Big Ten and being a bottom team in the Big Ten. I do love Maryland's running back room, though. On a more positive note, I want to talk about that after this ad from LinkedIn. These days, new potential hires feel like high-stakes wagers for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. A lot of people need jobs right now. If you want to find someone amazing for your company, LinkedIn Jobs helps find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. So post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I like the Maryland running back room a lot. I think that it could be a strength of our team. I do think that there's a shot where the Maryland's offensive line doesn't block well enough, and it does end up being the strength of our team. But I think that it has a chance to be a really good part of the team and a really high-level part of the team that benefits us and makes us better overall as a team. First of all, Roman Hemby. I think it's his year. It's almost good that he had a bad year, a down year last year, because I think that he's going to be more motivated, more locked in, more focused to know that he needs to play well and he needs to play at a high level. If you remember, his 2022 season, he looked like one of the best backs in the Big Ten, and he looked like he had all the potential. 188 carries for 989 yards with a 5.3 average, 10 touchdowns, and 33 receptions for 300 yards, 298 yards to be exact. In 2023, it dropped off to 142 carries for 680 yards, 4.8 average, 4 touchdowns, 38 receptions, more receptions though, 38 receptions for 349 yards. But now I'm looking at his stats, I'm looking at him as a player, and I'm saying, okay, the 2023 season was down. He had less yards, 989 to 680. But I think that might be good for him, and I know how much of a talent he is. People forget, last year, Mel Kiper had this kid number 2 on his running back big board, and it wasn't a great year for running backs, but still, if you're number 2 on the big board for running backs, there's always plenty of pretty good running backs. Even though it wasn't a great draft class for running backs, he had him ahead of a lot of people. I forget who's number 1. I want to say it was Blake Corum at first. Of course, all the running backs have gotten drafted, and NFL draft has happened, and he's coming back to Maryland, obviously. But Mel Kiper thought he was a really talented player, and I really think Roman Hemby, this is the year for him to be like, I'm a 1,000-yard rusher. I can receive the ball. He gives it all to you, and I think he is going to be one to take a ton of pressure off of MJ Morris and be the player that I know he can be, back to that 2022 type of guy. But he needs to be better than the 2022 type of guy because I think he's going to get more touches. I think this year's about Roman Hemby. He should be our offensive MVP at the end of the year. I think that he should be our best player on offense. I said the wide receiver room is a strength of our team, but if the quarterback room and the quarterback play is a little bit shaky, which I'm not saying it's going to be, but I don't think it's crazy to think it might be a little bit, then you're going to have to be able to run the ball a little bit. And it's never easy in the Big Ten. We play some of the best fronts in the country, the Big Ten, the SEC, I would say. But still, I think that Roman Hemby can do it at a high level, and I think that he's a big reason why I love this running back room. We're bringing back a third-year starter that's been a really good player in the Big Ten and has created a ton of problems for a lot of people in the Big Ten overall. But there's another kid that I really like that is a huge reason why I love this running back room, Nolan Ray. I'm watching this kid in the spring game, and I'm saying to myself, yeah, this kid's going to be something for us. The way he moves with his speed, he's got to be one of the best athletes on the team. He brings up Roman Hemby's a great, he's got some traits and some great athleticism, but Nolan Ray is probably the most explosive back in that room. And Nolan Ray can bring a change up, a mix up that nobody else in that room can provide. He can provide big time runs. Maybe it won't be consistent. He'll probably might be 1 yard carry, 2 yard carry, 2 yard carry, 2 yard carry. Oh, there's a 70-yard carry from Nolan Ray. But he brings an explosive element that you just got to find a way to get him the ball. I watched in the spring game where he had a super long touchdown run, and I'm watching him run, and I'm like, no wonder people are really high on this. This kid's explosive. This kid's an elite level athlete. This is the type of guy we want in this running back room. And I liked our running back room before. I wasn't in love with it. But with Nolan Ray, what I saw from Nolan Ray, I really like this running back room. I really like this. And then Colby McDonald was our most productive back in terms of the statistics, in terms of average yards per carry last year. He's a great, I don't know if he's technically the second option or the third option with Nolan Ray, but he's a great other guy to have in that room. A leader, has to provide experience, runs really hard, and he always averages a lot of yards per carry. At least he did last year. And I really like those three. And then we also have Deshaun, the freshman back, who's kind of next up, and he's going to be a really good player in a couple of years. So we have 4 guys that I really like in that room. And the interesting thing is Antoine Littleton left, and I'm not completely mad about it. I think it gives carries to other guys that are more explosive, can create bigger lanes and or not bigger lanes, but really hit the lanes a little bit harder and can be just better backs for us. I think Antoine Littleton got a little bit stuck last year. He didn't play his best ball at all. I think he was good in the short distance, but I don't want to take away carries from Roman Hemby, and that's what Antoine Littleton was doing, and he wasn't being super productive with it. And so now I'm looking at Roman Hemby and what he can do, and I really like Roman Hemby, and I really like Eli, or I do really like this running back room overall. I like Colby McDonald, and I like the rest of the room, and Nolan Ray, and Eli Mason too is another kid that's just waiting his turn, and I like Williams, the freshman. So I like this room, and I think it's in a good spot. Let's talk about freshman safety Brandon Jacobs. Find a way to get that kid on the field. I will talk about that after this ad from FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You guys have to get on FanDuel. I know a lot of you guys are watching the NBA playoffs and are watching the Nuggets come back, or or you're watching Ant Edwards and the Timberwolves, or you're watching the Knicks series, whatever it is, FanDuel is a great spot. If you want to bet over or under on Jalen Brunson, or if you want to bet the Nuggets to win the series, or whatever you want to do on FanDuel, or if you want to bet on the Celtics Cavaliers series, you can do that on FanDuel. And you get $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, and player props if you're new customers. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So Brandon Jacobs, the freshman safety, I've talked about him a good bit, but I want to talk about him some more. I've been thinking about Brandon Jacobs a lot, and I've been thinking about what his role is this year as a player, because there's a couple things that you have to kind of think about when you think about a player as highly recruited as Brandon Jacobs was, when you think about his place on the team and that being a guy that you want to be a starter, or you're going to need to be a starter for the next 3 years after this year. And so I'm thinking about Brandon Jacobs, and I think to myself, I really liked how he looked in spring game. Looked like he had range, looks like he can play in the box, looks like he can move around outside in the back half and play cover 3, play cover 2. It looks like he's going to be a really good player for Maryland football, and he was our highest rated player, and there's a reason why. And I'm thinking about him, and I'm thinking, we got to find a way to get this kid on the field. Some guys are just too talented. They're just too talented. They're just guys you have to get on the field. And Brandon Jacobs feels like one of those guys to have, but our safety position is probably the best position that we have. And it's a good problem to have. It's a good problem to have. To have too many good players at a position in college football is not a bad – it's never – I don't care if you're in the NFL, whatever level you're playing on. Having too many good players at a position group is never a bad thing. It's never a bad thing. Maybe sometimes it can be a problem in the quarterback room. One guy's not playing good, and you're like, let's get this other guy, and it gets a little bit complex. But most positions, I would say it's never a bad thing to have depth and to have a guy or have different guys that play at a really high level, and I think we have that. Dante Trader and Glendon Miller are two of the best, I think, in the Big Ten, and they might not get quite the credit. We'll see when the preseason and all that stuff comes out, but I think Dante Trader and Glendon Miller are just about as good as you can get back there, and I think those are two NFL type of guys. Glendon Miller, 6'4". He played the slot last year. Like, he's a freak. He can do it all. He can literally, like, that's what the type of guys they want in the NFL. A guy that played the slot, a guy that played safety. He's an all-around type of guy. He had a couple of interceptions last year, a couple tackle for losses, proved he can play in the run game up there. Like, he's a good player. And Dante Trader is just, he's the leader this year. He's taken on a leadership role, but he's also been an explosive playmaker back there at the safety spot. I thought him and Bo Braid had their best game against Ohio State last year, played up to the high level. And I'm not saying that either of them shouldn't be playing, that Brandon Jacobs should play over them. It's more just me saying Brandon Jacobs is so good, I want to find a place to play him. And whether that's, I don't hate Glendon Miller going up to play the slot again this year. I know that's probably not what's going to happen, but I don't hate it because I think about our cornerback room. We're going to have 2 new starters outside. I wouldn't mind having the experience of Glendon Miller on the inside playing that safety spot. But I don't know exactly how that will happen. I don't think that will happen. But I think that wouldn't be bad if we have Brandon Jacobs and Dante Trader out there. I think you just find ways to sprinkle Brandon Jacobs in, get him the experience because he's going to be the starter next year at safety, and I think he's going to be a really good player back there for Maryland football. But I think he's just a guy that's too good to not play a little bit. And there's also another side of this that I've been thinking about, and it's the portal. Guys will hit the portal, especially some of these highly rated guys that Maryland seems to get sometimes. I feel like they always usually end up, or not all of them, but a lot of them end up leaving. Chop Robinson did. Jayshon Barham just did. A lot of Maryland's talented recruits, really highly talented guys leave. And I'm not saying Brandon Jacobs is going to do that, but it would help if he sees the field a little bit his freshman year for him to want to stay and him not go find somewhere else to play. I think that's another level that you have to start thinking about. And I've always complained about Maryland football playing a ton of guys, but I think that's part of the reason why they play a lot of guys. Yes, they have plenty of guys that can play and they want to get different guys in, but I think a lot of it is you want to play different guys because you want players to feel like they're playing. You want players to feel like they have a part in the program because you don't want people to transfer. And that's a level of Brandon that when I'm talking about Brandon Jacobs, I feel like that's a part of it. You don't want him to play, but I also think he's too good not to get on the field a little bit this year, just in spots. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. If we have a game, if we're handling a game well, I don't mind sending Brandon Jacobs in there. But that's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked On Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked On Terps.